let's get started.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Dailey, the Executive Director of Global Washington, and welcome to the 2023 Goalmakers Conference. Thank you for joining from wherever you are in the world today. We're excited to launch our fully virtual day today, which will be followed by a fully in-person day next Thursday in Seattle, December 7th. This year's theme is around advancing transformative philanthropy. And the way this theme came about is conversations over the past 2 years with Global Washington members who started to talk more and more about localization and shifting decision-making to closer proximity to where the work is being done. And people are really starting to make these changes. But we all know that these changes won't come to fruition without funding. So today we're going to dive in deep around funding and the relationships between funder and recipient when it comes to global development. But before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsors for today and for our conference. We have Amazon, Microsoft, the Gates Foundation, the King Bowden Foundation, Give to Asia, Myriad, Landesa, Opportunity International, World Vision, and Umpqua Bank. Thank you all for your generous support. Also, I wanted to remind everyone, if you're not familiar with Global Washington, please go to our website and find out more information. We have a thriving network of nonprofit and for-profit organizations, academic institutions, and foundations that all have a presence in Washington State and do work to improve lives in developing countries. So again, I wanted to reflect back a little bit on the conferences we've had over the past few years. If you've been to our virtual conference or in-person conference last year, you heard from Naina Batra, who's the CEO of AVPN, and Dagan Ali from Adesso. Both of them talked about localization and the need for more funding to organizations that are local in low and middle income countries. They were very provocative and sparked a lot of conversations between now and then. And again, it's an inspiration for the conversations today. You're going to hear a lot from funders and from NGOs. We come to, as a neutral platform, to have these conversations to really unpack the power dynamics between funder and recipient. And you'll hear examples of what works and what doesn't, and the challenges. Global Washington is also committed to the process of co-creation. We believe that co-creation can inspire innovation and more equity. So we come to this as looking at co-creation as it applies to funding. Our overall objective of the conference is to really provide a gathering space for practitioners and funders in global development to explore new funding models and use this co-creation model to create better programs. We hope that you come away inspired and find a new connection. And with that, I want you to know that you can explore the Whova platform that we've been using. You've all found the agenda and found this first session, but go into the community tab as well. There's discussion boards and ways to connect to other participants. You can set up one-on-one virtual meetings with somebody across the world, and you can do icebreakers and also ask questions of our speakers in the Q&A tab in the agenda. So please continue to use that Whova app to connect. So with that, I would like to start and introduce our first speaker. I'm not going to read her full bio because it's in Whova, but Rebecca Darwent is a senior advisor of collaboratives at an organization called Philanthropy Together. She came to this work through her own social entrepreneur work, building partnerships and mobilizing multi-million-dollar investments in equity, health, and education. In 2020, Rebecca co-founded the Foundation for Black Communities in Canada. She is a women leader for the World Fellows and a Canadian Millennium Laureate. I am so happy that Rebecca is with us here today. She's going to talk a little bit more about trust-based philanthropy for global issues, giving circles, and collaborative funds. With that, Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning and good afternoon and a global welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Kristen. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you all today. I am really excited to talk to you about something that just warms my heart, and it is the collaborative advantage of the collective giving movement. Many of you are familiar with this work. You live and breathe it in the day-to-day. And ultimately, the thread that ties us all together is a real generosity of spirit and a desire to do work together to benefit our world. I want to share that the collective giving movement is really an how mechanism to trust-based philanthropy, and I'll be able to dive into that a little bit more in our time together today. So right off the bat, I just want to say that it's very crucial to understand that collective giving is not new. It is not an American concept or a North American concept or a Western concept. It is deeply rooted in cultures and communities around the globe. And there are many collective giving efforts underway. In my family, we call a collective giving a box hand. And there's places where it's called susu or tandas or tongtin. And really, we're talking about an effort to mobilize and pool resources and redistribute it to where it's needed most in community. Collective giving, as many of us know, comes in many forms. Giving circles, fundraising circles, mutual aid societies, there's women's funds, and so much more. And the thread that unites all of these different types of giving is creating a sense of belonging, holding space for discourse, giving with trust, and acting in a spirit of abundance. And ultimately, that we're doing it in a space that is happening together. In our world today, we are facing polycrises, multiple crises. Every one of us has experienced the pandemic and the climate crisis that we're facing. There's so many different things that are coming online. And traditional forms of philanthropy, really working in a one-to-one approach, is no longer fitting the scale and the complexity of the challenges that we're facing. There is no one funder, no one donor, or one institution that could donate to one single grantee in order to meet the needs that we're seeing. What we're looking for is a shift towards a many-to-many approach, and that's what I'll be able to dive into a little bit more with giving circles and collaborative funds. So when we're looking at many-to-many, we're able to scale the funding that's available. We're able to use very nimble and grassroots connections and relationships to distribute those funding. And we want to be really rooted in what they call proximate leadership, but ultimately it's ensuring that the people who are closest to the challenges that we're facing are equipped and have the autonomy and self-determination to address those challenges on their own terms. At the core of this is that we believe that intertwined challenges really demand interwoven solutions. So when we talk about a giving circle or a collaborative fund, I want to break down the three core elements that are really involved. Number one, we have pooled resources. So this may come from like-minded donors or institutions where there is an opportunity to bring money in from multiple places. Then the second key pillar is that we have multi-level collaboration. So the decisions that are being made, it's not happening by any one individual or one institution. There is a real back and forth and rigor around the who and how of setting priorities and distributing funds. And then the third pillar is we're talking about scaled systems impact. So this is how we can really get into looking at how we can address policy challenges, looking at research, looking at narrative change and movement building. And this allows us to really achieve something at scale. So collaborative funds in particular are a different model of giving. There's about 400 collaborative funds around the world. And I know that many of you are working in a global context, and I want to be able to highlight 3 collaborative funds in particular that are really moving the dollars in creative ways around the world. There is a huge desire recognizing the disparity between North American individuals and folks in the global south and of the global majority. And so what we see is organizations that have been spearheaded by community members themselves looking to resource in their own local area. So one of those examples is the Equality Fund. And in this case, we have global feminists making decisions on behalf of and with and in solidarity to feminist leaders on the ground around the world. Ultimately, it's feminists who are making these decisions about where those dollars go. In addition to the Equality Fund, we have Klima Fund, which is funding international grassroots movements to cool the planet. One of their large partners is Via Campesina. It's a global movement of over 200 million peasant farm workers. And to be able to connect and use one organization to be able to connect to that incredible size of people and really fuel the movement is something that is quite unique. Another organization based in India is Dasra, which means, then Dasra, the word means enlightened giving. It was founded in 1999 and continues to do its work. It's grown over the last 20 years. And Dasra has been able to move over $300 million to 1,500 NGOs in India. And a really interesting example of how they do their work is they are partnered with government, they're partnered with local NGOs and individual people who are really fueling the next wave of what change can look like in India. One of the examples that I like to cite from this organization is that they have a girls adolescent collaborative, and here they have mobilized over 300 girl champions across 3 states and 85 villages. These young women wrote a letter writing campaign and were successful in achieving Adolescent Health Day in partnership with the government. These young women were able to be connected to decision makers and government officials. And not only was Dasra able to create the context and the platform for this very unique partnership, they also funded a documentary film that took track of what was happening and was able to do the storytelling. So you have the direct funding to the NGO, you have the policy changes with government and a win in a new day being recognized, and then the narrative shift as well, and contributing to how we're doing our storytelling. So what I would like to encourage all of you on the call today is to really think about your individual organization or giving circle. How are you really reaching out to communities and networks that you may not be in contact with regularly? Who is at your table? Who's setting the priorities? And is there a way that you can use collective giving and tapping into the wide network of collaborative funds in particular to really distribute your dollars in a way that is going to get to the people on the ground that you may be very, very far away from, but want to ignite your generosity to impact directly? So those are some opening comments, and I welcome Kristen. I'd love to kind of dive into some of these concepts a little bit more with you.
That's so great, Rebecca. Thank you for kind of setting the stage for our conversation today. And it's great information. I think it's information that people just don't know about, especially the specific examples you're giving is it really informative. So thank you. And again, to challenge all of us to think differently of how we're doing funding and how we're reaching out and who's at the table. I do have a couple of follow-up questions. When you think about trust-based philanthropy, when some people hear that term for the first time, they might think that it means none or very little follow-up to determine if there's actually impact of the donation. Do you think this is true?
No, I don't. I think what one of the misconceptions of trust-based philanthropy is that it's very hands-off. And ultimately, it's a mechanism of allowing the communities that are most close to the issue to determine what the impact metrics are. And it's a communication and a shared process of being able to be humble, right? To be humble and recognize that you may not know the local context, and your positionality may not allow you to see what success actually looks like and means for that community. I used to do street outreach in New York City, and one of the most humbling moments for me was I was working with somebody who was underhoused and didn't have a place to sleep for the night. And I was really pushing to go into shelter. And they came back and told me, like, Rebecca, you have no idea how much safer it is for me to sleep in the subway tonight rather than going into shelter. And that helped me recognize my positionality, and me saying this is what's good for you is not how it works, right? And so we need to really be able to humble ourselves as folks who have the privilege and the ability to give, to listen and be attuned to the needs of other people and allow them to be self-determined in meeting their goals. And so what metrics you're going to come up with may be so far removed from what the metrics of success for the communities that you're hoping to help are. So that's a personal experience that I have on an individual to individual basis, but it is the very same questions to ask yourself at an institutional level and especially in global giving.
So a lot of the follow-up is talking with the recipients or the people involved to figure out where their self-determination is and what impact they found for themselves. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not saying, okay, I've made the donation and I'm never going to hear back. It's more, I've made the donation and what are you really seeking to solve? And listening. And I think the benefit of that is that the dollars that are deployed will be more successfully distributed and utilized.
Yeah, definitely. This sounds like, and from what I've experienced, this is very relationship based, and there is trust there, and a lot of people feel trust and give to leaders that they feel like are making a difference and that they trust. So what happens if that leader leaves the organization or if there's changes to that relationship?
One of my biggest pieces of work in this field is thinking about leadership and leadership succession. And I think that the reality is that social justice and giving and this kind of philanthropy can be very taxing on leaders. And so I don't want to say expect transition, but I also am saying expect transition. It's fine. You know, if you believe in an individual person, their values and their leadership is often embedded within the organization itself. And it might be a question to ask up front, you know, how are you doing in your work? What are your plans for transition? And how, as a funder, can I be supportive in ensuring that that cultivation of the next generation of leadership is happening? I would say that ultimately it's organizations that stand the test of time, and to believe not just in the individual leader, but in the power of their leadership. If you believe truly in their leadership, then those leaders will be cultivating their team and their staff and their partners on the ground. And so it is hard at any point when there's transition and change, but it is also part of the health of our movements over time.
Mhm. That's a really good point, that sometimes change is healthy, and that it is common in
Yeah.
this in this sector. So expect it, but also look for that leadership qualities embedded in the organization. That's really great. Thank you. So another question. Global philanthropy, obviously, there's significant distance. You mentioned this earlier, but to do trust-based philanthropy, it's not as easy as going to the school down the street and seeing the work being done. So can you talk a little bit more about the distance or the challenges around global philanthropy and what your suggestions could be to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, definitely. I think that one of the how mechanisms is a collaborative fund, and leaning into some of the global collaborative funds that are out there. I know that AVPN was is part of your community. That's an example of a collaborative fund that has really tapped into the local ecosystem and can be in touch with partners on the ground and having those conversations in a way that we won't be able to in a North American context. So I want to just encourage people to learn about collaborative funds, to seek them out. Bridgespan has been doing a lot of research on collaborative funds. Philanthropy Together has been mobilizing this field, as well as the Gates Foundation. So there are three players and many others who are really advancing this work. And so you can research which ones are active in the issue area that you might be interested in, whether it's climate or gender justice, racial justice, migrant issues. So you can search them by issue area, and you can also search by geography. And so I really encourage people to take that step of researching and seeing where there might be local partners on the ground and trusting those intermediaries to do the work. Intermediary has uh, like kind of an interesting and fraught dynamic in this space, but I think it is the most powerful way for us to lean into trust-based practices.
That's great. We actually have one question from an audience member, from Eric Klender, which I think if I understand it right, do you feel that people coming together for collaborative funds, they start with a targeted solution? Maybe it's climate change, maybe it's education, and then they've he says gain buy-in, or do they, or start with a solution, or do they start with a core group of donors who then find the solution?
Mhm. I think it's both. So the answer, Eric, is both. It's not an either or. It's often frustratingly an and. So I think that it's very possible to have donors who decide to pool their resources and then seek out solutions, or maybe already have their thesis on what change might look like, and then they kind of might go out to the field to source ideas and projects that fit their thesis. And I will be clear in my point of view that the latter, that kind of we're pooling our resources and have a point of view, is maybe not the best approach. I think it's important to see what's out there, see what work is happening on the ground. And that's part of the trust-based element, is what are communities really asking for? And how can you tap into what communities are asking for?
That's great. And related to that, do you see collaborative funds giving project funds or unrestricted?
The coolest part of the collaborative funding movement, from my perspective, having co-founded a collaborative fund and now doing work with hundreds of collaborative funds, the most interesting thing is how truly trust-based they are in their approach. Many of them only provide operational dollars. They provide multi-year funding, and they are committed to seeing that long-term growth. So they, one of the collaborative funds that grants globally is the Black Feminist Fund. Black Feminist Fund partners for 8-year grant terms.
Wow.
8 years, which is absolutely unheard of in the traditional philanthropic sector, right? And even in international development, so many of us are trapped in these 1-year cycles. Imagine what can be possible when we're funding on 8-year terms. And
Mhm.
they're funding in large amounts on 8-year terms. So another unique feature of collaborative funds is funds often partner with other funds because they have a sense of how far they can go, and then they partner with another organization that also is working in a collaborative funding way. And so a quality fund that I mentioned is also partnered with other funds around the world to be able to get their dollars deployed in the Middle East, in the Caribbean, on the continent of Africa, et cetera, et cetera.
That's so interesting, and it makes a lot of sense. Can you say a little bit more if there are funds that are multi-year funding? Do they have an endowment? Because if this is more of a collaborative fund where people are putting in annually, or do they put in for 3 years or multi-year? How does that mechanism work?
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of all collaborative funds because some of them have an endowment and some of them don't. But many of them don't have endowments. And so many of them, every dollar that's raised in that fiscal year actually goes out in that fiscal year. And the vast majority of them are deploying 80 to 90% of the dollars that are raised directly to organizations on the ground.
Yeah, no, that's great. We have time for maybe one more question that just came in. It says, has there been any challenges with this co-financing approach so far? Are there any issues around power relations for the collaborative fund approach?
Yes, thank you so much, Steve, for this question. Ultimately, there's always going to be power dynamics. And so what's interesting is even though collaborative fund leaders are often coming from the movements that they are part of, so if you're funding in climate, they might have been on the front lines of the climate justice movement for many years. And what's interesting is those power dynamics, when you have money at play, are always present. And it can be a bit of a transition. I mean, even for myself, I went from being like a street outreach frontline worker to being on the fundraise, like on the fund giving and grant making side of things. And there are power dynamics at play. What helps is transparency and acknowledging it. So we are all in different points on our journeys of understanding power dynamics, and we're all in different and unique vantage points of pushing the system. So funders have a very unique place, and often it's not to dictate or to question too much what's happening with our grant partners. It's typically a really high leverage place is to ask other funders, hey, how are you embedding this work? Maybe you could do this differently. When you hear a peer talking about 1-year funding on a very, very large problem, just asking an instigating question amongst your peers can be very powerful. So recognizing that you have power, and then how can you use it? Power in and of itself, or privilege in and of itself, is not good or bad. It's not weighted in that. It's what do you actually do with it? How can you use your positionality, your resources, your social capital, your political capital to benefit the partners on the ground and to shift the sector that you're in? So
Yeah.
I thank you, Steve, for the question. It's a complicated one, but we all have a responsibility to ask the questions and to change our actions.
It's so great. We are out of time, but Rebecca, this is perfect. What a great, inspiring way to start the conference. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
For those of you watching, it is time for you to go to one of the breakout sessions. You have to go back to the agenda and pick one, sorry, but pick one of 3 of the breakout sessions to join. So back to the agenda and click on the link there. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.